Welcome to Echoes of the Unknown, the podcast where we'll be exploring some of the world's most fascinating unsolved mysteries. I'm Jack Montgomery, and today we're traveling back to 1990 when two men dressed as police officers were let into the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum in Boston, Massachusetts. 81 minutes later, 13 priceless works of art were gone, currently valued at over $500 million. No alarm sounded. No suspects were arrested. More than 30 years later, only the empty frames remain, silent witnesses to the greatest art heist in history. In the early hours of March 18, 1990, Boston was quiet in the way only late winter nights can be. The city was still, the streets mostly empty, the cold lingering in the air. The world-renowned Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum sat dark and silent, its stone facade giving no hint that within its walls hung some of the most valuable works of art in the world. The Gardner Museum was unlike any other museum in America. Founded by Isabella Stewart Gardner herself, it was designed to feel less like an institution and more like a private home. Gardner, a wealthy and eccentric Boston socialite, collected art with passion and intuition, rather than strict academic rules. The museum was built under her guidance to house her personal art collection. It opened to the public in 1903, and Gardner continued to expand the collection and arrange it until she died in 1924. When she died, Gardner left a will that called for her art collection to be permanently exhibited for the education and enjoyment of the public forever. It further stipulated that her collection must remain exactly as she arranged it. If anything was altered, sold, or moved, the entire collection would be donated to Harvard University. That condition would loom heavily in the decades to come. Gardner left the museum with an endowment of approximately $1 million, equivalent to about $19 million today. However, by the 1980s, the museum was running low on funds. This financial strain left the museum in poor condition. It lacked a climate control system, did not have an insurance policy, and was in need of basic building maintenance. After the FBI uncovered a plot by Boston criminals to rob the museum in 1982, its board of trustees allocated funds to improve security. Among these improvements were 60 infrared motion detectors and a closed-circuit television system consisting of 4 cameras placed around the building's perimeter. Although the security cameras produced only grainy images, no cameras had been installed inside the museum, as its board of trustees considered the cost prohibitive. But additional security guards were hired. Despite these security improvements, the only manner in which guards could summon police to the museum was by pressing a panic button at the security desk. Other area museums had fail-safe systems that required night watchmen to place hourly phone calls with the police to indicate that conditions were normal, but not the Gardner Museum. An independent consultant reviewed the museum's security operations in 1988 and recommended improvements. The security director at the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston also suggested security upgrades to the Gardner Museum. However, because of the museum's financial strain and Gardner's directive forbidding major renovations, the Board of Trustees did not approve these security enhancements. The board also denied a request from the security director for higher guard salaries in a bid to attract more qualified applicants. The museum's guards were paid slightly higher than minimum wage, and the museum's security flaws were an open secret among the guards. Overnight, security consisted of just 2 guards, who were often young and relatively inexperienced. The audacious robbery occurred early on Sunday, March 18, the day after St. Patrick's Day. The thieves were first witnessed around 12:30 a.m. by several St. Patrick's Day revelers leaving a party near the museum. The 2 men were dressed as police officers and parked in a hatchback on Palace Road, about 100 feet from the side entrance. The witnesses thought they were policemen. The museum guards on duty that night were Rick Abath, age 23, and Randy Heston, age 25. Abath was a regular night watchman, but that day was Heston's first time on the night shift. The museum's security policy required that one guard would patrol the galleries with a flashlight and walkie-talkie, while the other would sit at the security desk. When Abath took the first patrol, fire alarms sounded in several rooms, but he could not locate any fire or smoke. He returned to the security room, where the fire alarm control panel indicated smoke in multiple rooms. He assumed that some type of malfunction had occurred and disabled the panel before returning to his patrol. Before completing his rounds, he stopped at the side entrance of the museum, briefly opening the side door and shutting it again without informing Heston. Abath returned to the security desk around 1 a.m., and Heston assumed patrol duties. At 1:20 a.m., the thieves drove to the side of the museum, parked, and walked to the service entrance at the side door. They rang the buzzer, which connected them to the security desk through an intercom. They explained that they were police investigating a disturbance and insisted that they be admitted. Abath could see them on the closed-circuit television, wearing what appeared to be police uniforms, complete with hats, badges, and utility belts. Although he was not aware of any disturbance, he surmised that a St. Patrick's Day reveler may have climbed over the fence, causing someone to report it to the police. Standard procedure dictated that guards were not to admit anyone after hours unless authorized by museum administration. But the guard, perhaps tired or perhaps trusting the uniforms and badges, made a decision that would echo for decades. He buzzed them in at 1:24 a.m. The two men first entered a locked foyer that separated the side door from the museum. They approached Abath at the security desk and asked if anyone else was in the museum. He radioed Heston to return to the security desk. Around this time, he noticed that the taller man's mustache appeared to be fake. The shorter man told Abath that he looked familiar and said they may have a warrant for his arrest, demanding that he emerge from behind the desk to provide identification. He complied, leaving the desk that contained the museum's only panic button to alert police. The shorter man forced him against a wall, spread his legs, and handcuffed him. Heston walked into the room shortly thereafter, and the taller thief turned him toward the wall and handcuffed him as well. With both guards now handcuffed, the thieves revealed that their true intentions were to rob the museum, and they warned the guards not to cause any problems. The thieves wrapped duct tape around the heads and eyes of the guards. Without asking for directions, they led the guards into the basement, where the guards were handcuffed to a steam pipe and workbench. The thieves examined the guards' wallets and threatened that they knew where the guards lived. They also told them that if they didn't inform the authorities about the thieves, they would receive a reward in about a year. It took the thieves less than 15 minutes to subdue the guards, which they completed at about 1:35 a.m. With the guards incapacitated, the thieves had free rein of the museum. Over the next 81 minutes, they moved calmly and deliberately through the galleries. They didn't trigger alarms. They didn't smash display cases in a frenzy. This was not a chaotic smash and grab. It was methodical, selective, and strangely calm. The thieves' movements through the museum were recorded on infrared motion detectors. Steps in the first room they entered, the Dutch room on the second floor, were not recorded until 1:48 a.m. This was 13 minutes after they had finished subduing the guards, perhaps indicating that they waited to make sure police had not been alerted. As the thieves approached the paintings, a sensor sounded that was intended to alert when patrons moved too close to artwork, and the thieves smashed the device. The thieves removed from the wall two works by Dutch painter Rembrandt, The Storm on the Sea of Galilee and A Lady and Gentleman in Black. The former is his only seascape, and the most valuable of his works stolen that night, with an estimated value of about $140 million. They tossed the paintings onto the marble floor, shattering their glass frames, and then used a blade to cut the canvases out of their stretchers. They also removed a large Rembrandt self-portrait oil painting from the wall, but left it leaning against a cabinet. Investigators believe the thieves may have considered it too large to transport, perhaps because it was painted on wood and not canvas like the others. They instead took a small, postage stamp-sized etching by Rembrandt that was a self-portrait, which was on display beneath a larger portrait. On the right side of the room, the thieves removed two paintings, Landscape with Obelisk and The Concert, from their frames. The latter piece, by Dutch painter Vermeer, is one of just 34 to 36 paintings attributed to him, accounting for half of the theft's overall value, with that piece estimated at $250 million in 2015. Experts believe that The Concert may be the most valuable stolen object in the world. The thieves may have taken Landscape with Obelisk believing that it was a Rembrandt, since it was long attributed to him until it was quietly credited to his pupil, Govert Flinck, a few years before the heist. The last item taken from the Dutch room was a bronze gew about 10 inches tall. Traditionally used for serving wine in ancient China, the beaker was one of the oldest works in the museum, dating back to the Shang dynasty in the 12th century BC. Its estimated value is only several $1,000s, so authorities have no idea why it was stolen. Moments later, the thieves entered a narrow hallway called the Short Gallery on the other end of the second floor, where they began removing screws for a frame displaying a flag for Napoleon's Imperial Guard. They appeared to have abandoned the effort to steal the flag, since some screws were not removed. They ultimately took a 10-inch tall French Imperial eagle finial atop the flagpole, which may have appeared to be made of gold to the thieves. They also took 5 sketches by French artist Edgar Degas from the room. They were each drawn on paper less than a square foot in size and made with pencils, inks, washes, and charcoal. They are of relatively little value compared with the other stolen works, worth less than $100,000 combined. The last work stolen was Chez Tortoni by French painter Edouard Manet. It was taken from the Blue Room and was the only item taken from the first floor of the museum. Curiously, the museum's motion detectors did not detect any motion within the Blue Room during the thieves' time in the building. The only footsteps detected in the room that night were Abath's during the 2 times when he passed through the gallery on his earlier patrol. As they prepared to leave, the thieves checked the guards again and asked if they were comfortable. They then moved to the security director's office, where they took the video cassettes that contained evidence of their entrance from the closed-circuit cameras, as well as the data printouts from the motion detecting equipment. The movement data was also captured on a hard drive, which remained untouched. The frame for Chez Tortoni was left at the security director's desk. At approximately 2:45 a.m., the thieves exited the museum through the same door they had entered. They wheeled the artworks out, likely wrapped or concealed, and disappeared into the night. The next guard shift arrived at the museum later in the morning and realized that something was amiss when they could not establish contact with anyone inside for admittance. They called the security director, who entered the building with his keys, and found nobody at the watch desk before calling the police. The police searched the building and found the guards still bound in the basement. It quickly became clear that something extraordinary had happened. The 2 thieves had walked away with riches of almost incalculable art historical value. In 1990, the FBI estimated the value of the theft at $200 million, and they raised the estimate to $500 million by 2000. In the late 2000s, some art dealers suggested that the total value of the 13 pieces of stolen artwork could be $600 million. To this day, it is considered the highest value art heist in history. The eclectic mix of stolen items has long puzzled experts. What the thieves did not take is just as puzzling as what they took. They left behind a Raphael sketch worth tens of millions of dollars. They passed over works by Botticelli and Michelangelo. They ignored items that, on paper, were more valuable and easier to transport. Instead, they opted to take some relatively valueless items, such as the goo and finial. In addition, the thieves did not enter the third floor where Titian's The Rape of Europa hung, which is among the most valuable paintings in the entire city. The selection of pieces and the thieves' rough treatment of the artwork has led investigators to believe that they were not experts commissioned to steal particular works. In addition to the damage inflicted upon the stolen works on canvas, which were crudely cut with a blade out of their stretchers, many of them were then likely rolled up, and in doing so were probably damaged. Furthermore, conservationists have stressed that a failure to properly store most of the stolen works under optimal conservation conditions would also guarantee further damage. In the instances where the thieves cut the canvases directly from their frames, leaving the ornate gilded frames hanging empty on the walls, this act caused irreversible damage to the artworks and suggested a lack of concern for preservation. To many experts, this reinforced the idea that the thieves were not acting on behalf of a sophisticated collector. Because of the museum's low funds and lack of an insurance policy, the director solicited help from Sotheby's and Christie's auction houses to post a reward of $1 million within 3 days. This was later increased to $5 million in 1997, and in 2017, it was doubled to $10 million. This reward has been extended indefinitely by the museum's Board of Trustees and remains the largest bounty ever offered by a private institution. It applies to information that leads directly to the recovery of all of the items in good condition. A share of the reward is promised in exchange for information leading to the return of one or more individual pieces. A separate reward of $100,000 is being offered for information leading to the return of the Napoleonic eagle finial. The FBI took control of the case almost immediately on the grounds that the artwork could likely cross state lines. Investigators have called the case unique for its lack of strong physical evidence. It is unknown if the thieves left DNA evidence. Although fingerprints and footprints were found at the scene, it could not be concluded whether they were from the thieves or from museum employees or visitors. The FBI has performed DNA analysis in the years following the theft as advancements in the field have grown. Some of the evidence has been lost among the agency's files. The guards and witnesses in the street could provide only limited descriptions, with one thief described as being about 5 feet 9 to 5 feet 10 inches, in his late 30s with a medium build, and the other as 6 feet to 6 feet 1 inch, in his early 30s with a heavier build. The thieves had spoken little and moved with confidence, suggesting they had planned the job carefully. Early theories by investigators focused on organized crime. At the time, Boston had a well-established criminal underworld, including ties to the Italian mafia and Irish organized crime groups. Art theft, investigators believed, was often less about selling the art and more about using it as leverage. Stolen masterpieces could be used as collateral in drug deals, bargaining chips for reduced sentences, or trophies within criminal circles. Over the years, numerous suspects emerged. Some were small-time criminals with big claims. Others were well-known figures in organized crime. Informants came forward with tips that led nowhere. Searches were conducted in warehouses, homes, and even remote properties, but none of the stolen artwork was recovered. One persistent theory centered on the idea that the thieves were not art experts, but had some inside knowledge of the museum's layout and weaknesses. The fact that they knew where to go, how to avoid triggering alarms, and which doors to use suggested prior reconnaissance. Whether this knowledge came from former employees, contractors, or simply careful observation remains unclear. One of the museum guards, Rick Abath, was investigated at an early stage because of his suspicious behavior on the night of the theft. His action in briefly opening and closing a side door while on patrol was a move that some believe could have been a signal to the thieves parked outside. He told authorities that he opened and closed the door routinely to ensure that it was locked. However, one of his colleagues told journalists that if he had opened the door routinely as he maintained, supervisors would have noticed him doing so from their computer printouts and stopped the behavior. The museum's motion detectors did not detect any movement in the Blue Room, which housed Chez Tortoni, during the time the thieves were in the museum. The only footsteps recorded in the room that night were Abath's during his security patrol. A security consultant reviewed the motion detector equipment several weeks after the theft and determined they were operating correctly. Critics point to those facts as suspicious, but Abath consistently denied any involvement, and authorities never charged him with a crime related to the theft. In 2015, the FBI released a security video from the museum on the night before the theft showing Abath admitting an unidentified man into the museum to converse at the security desk. He told investigators that he could not recall the incident or recognize the man, and the FBI requested the public's assistance. Several former museum guards came forward and identified the stranger as the museum's deputy security chief. Abath maintained his innocence throughout his life until his death at age 57 in 2024. The FBI agent overseeing the case in its early years concluded that the guards were too incompetent and foolish to have committed the crime. Over the decades that followed the Gardner Museum heist, investigators have chased countless theories, from Irish paramilitaries to international black market collectors, but only a few suspect lines have ever gained real traction. However, despite extensive investigations, none have ever produced solid evidence or led to any recovered artwork. The FBI's investigation evolved to focus on theories that the crime was orchestrated not by isolated amateurs, but by criminal associates linked to the Boston Mafia. Right after the heist, investigators considered a range of suspects, including organized crime figures active in Boston at the time. Early suspicion fell on James Whitey Bulger, who was the most powerful mob boss in the city. As head of the Irish-American Winter Hill Gang, Bulger controlled much of the city's underworld. FBI agent Thomas McShane, an art crime specialist, investigated Bulger's possible involvement, partly because of his long history with the Bureau and his ties to local police and even international groups like the Irish Republican Army. Bulger was a longtime FBI informant, serving as a top echelon confidential asset from 1975 to the early 1990s. He utilized his relationship with his FBI handler to eliminate rivals, particularly the Italian Mafia, while avoiding prosecution. However, the evidence linking him directly to planning or executing the Gardner Museum theft was weak and largely circumstantial. McShane explored whether Bulger's connections explained how the thieves got police uniforms or whether the modus operandi suggested involvement by groups tied to Bulger's network, but the evidence didn't hold up. Publicly, the FBI has never stated that Bulger was a suspect in the heist itself or that they had evidence tying him to it. Some accounts suggest that former FBI agent John Connolly, Bulger's handler, was asked after his retirement to talk to him about the heist, but that Bulger claimed he knew nothing about it. In 1994, hope briefly resurfaced when the museum received an anonymous letter from a supposed third-party negotiator. The writer claimed the paintings were stolen to reduce a prison sentence and were now being held in a climate-controlled facility outside the United States. The letter included insider details known only to the FBI and the museum, lending it credibility. A coded response was published in the Boston Globe, but after one follow-up letter, the contact vanished forever. One night in August 1997, investigative journalist Tom Mashberg was taken to a warehouse in Red Hook, Brooklyn, where he was shown what appeared to be Rembrandt's Storm on the Sea of Galilee. He was escorted there by William Youngworth III, a small-time antiques dealer with a lengthy criminal record who claimed he could help recover the masterpieces stolen in the Gardner Museum heist. In the dim light, Youngworth unfurled a rolled canvas, and by flashlight, Mashberg believed he saw the famous Rembrandt seascape, and even noted what looked like the artist's signature. He wrote about it in the Boston Herald under the headline, "We've seen it," leaving out identifying details to protect his source. However, investigators later cast serious doubt on whether the painting was authentic. While paint chips that Youngworth supplied tested as genuine 17th century material, they did not match the specific materials used in the stolen storm on the Sea of Galilee. The FBI found nothing in the warehouse when they searched it later, and many experts now think that what Mashberg saw may have been a very good forgery rather than the real thing. The FBI also investigated a gang operating out of a Dorchester auto repair shop run by Carmelo Merlino, a Patriarca crime family underboss. The Patriarca family's Boston faction was connected at the time to mafia boss Frank Salem and the gang war in New England in the early 1990s. Investigators believe that Merlino and his associates may have known of the museum's vulnerabilities and that members of that circle were actively discussing the artwork in the years after the theft. Several mob associates emerged as key figures, including Robert Guarente, a convicted bank robber with organized crime ties in Boston and Philadelphia. Guarente's widow Eileen came forward in 2010, several years after his death in 2004, and told FBI investigators that her late husband had once possessed at least 2 of the stolen paintings. She claimed that when he became ill, he passed 2 of the paintings to Robert Gentile, a longtime Connecticut-based mob associate. Her tip was one of the reasons the FBI focused renewed attention on Gentile. Evidence reviewed included a handwritten list of stolen pieces found during one of multiple FBI searches of his home and reports that he discussed the artwork's sale with others. However, Gentile repeatedly denied any knowledge or involvement with the heist. Investigators say he failed a polygraph test, then partially recanted. No conclusive evidence ever placed the art in his hands, despite an FBI search uncovering a suspicious empty ditch beneath his shed, and no charges were ever filed. In 2013, the FBI made its strongest public statement yet, announcing it had identified the thieves with what they said was a high degree of confidence. Investigators said they believed they had identified the 2 men who physically carried out the robbery. They described them as members of a criminal organization operating in New England in the mid-Atlantic, and said the artwork was believed to have later moved through Connecticut and Philadelphia. The Bureau declined to name the men, saying the investigation into the artwork's recovery was still active. Later statements in 2015 suggested that both suspects were deceased, meaning the trail, at least on paper, had gone cold. At one point, the FBI zeroed in on David Turner and George Reisfelder, two other longtime associates of Merlino. Some investigators believe they may have been the two men who actually carried out the heist. Reisfelder died in 1991, just 1 year after the Gardner Museum heist. Although Turner served 21 years in prison for a separate planned robbery of an armored car depot, he maintained that he was out of state at the time of the theft. He always denied involvement, even when offered leniency in exchange for return of the paintings. A separate and increasingly compelling line of investigation points to Bobby Donati, a career criminal and associate of the Patriarca crime family. According to notorious art thief Miles Connor, the robbery was masterminded by Donati and his associate David Houghton, a small-time criminal and longtime friend of Connor's. The theory suggests the paintings were never meant to be sold. Instead, they were leverage, bargaining chips to negotiate a reduced sentence or favors for Vincent Ferrara, a well-known mobster from Boston who is a made member of the Patriarca crime family and was imprisoned at the time. Indeed, some investigators believe Donati may have been the architect of the heist, not the man who entered the museum, but the one who planned it. Multiple sources later corroborated that Donati organized the heist, buried the artwork, and distributed some pieces to trusted associates. Donati was murdered in a gang war in 1991, taking whatever knowledge he had with him. Houghton died of a heart attack that same year. One of the most haunting aspects of the case is the idea that the art may still exist, hidden away in an attic, a basement, or a storage unit, unseen for decades. Oil paintings, if stored improperly, degrade over time. Exposure to moisture, heat, or neglect could mean that some of these masterpieces are slowly being destroyed. The longer they remain missing, the greater the risk that they may never be recovered in displayable condition. And yet, there is also hope. Art stolen decades earlier has resurfaced before. Paintings lost during World War II have been found hanging in private homes. Ancient artifacts have been returned after generations. The possibility remains that someone, somewhere, knows exactly where the Gardner Museum's stolen paintings are. When the crime happened, the statute of limitations for art theft was 5 years. As a result, the legal deadline to prosecute the heist expired in 1995, and the original thieves can no longer be charged for the theft itself. However, authorities can still pursue charges related to possessing, receiving, or transporting the stolen art. In 1994, Congress changed the law to make art theft a federal crime with a longer statute of limitations, up to 20 years. But that change applied after the Gardner Museum theft and did not retroactively extend the window for this specific case. As decades passed following the heist with no resolution, the Gardner Museum faced a dilemma. As Isabella Stewart Gardner's will prohibited any changes to the arrangement of the collection, the Board of Trustees decided not to remove the empty frames that previously held the stolen paintings. Instead, the museum left them hanging on the walls in the locations where the original works once hung. Those empty frames remain there today, a powerful reminder of the priceless works of art that were lost, as well as a symbol of hope that they will someday be recovered. So when visitors walk through the galleries, they will still see the ornate gilt frames suspended on the walls, but with nothing inside them. A striking visual of the most famous unsolved art heist in history. More than 30 years later, the mystery remains. Leads have surfaced, suspects have come and gone, and theories continue to evolve. But the truth remains just out of reach. Somewhere the paintings may still exist, hidden in basements, vaults, or private rooms, unseen by the world they once belonged to. Until they resurface, the Gardner Museum heist remains more than an audacious crime. It is a silence, carefully preserved, waiting to be broken. Whether they're hidden somewhere, destroyed, or quietly being passed from hand to hand, 13 masterpieces remain lost to time, at least for now. Thank you for listening to today's episode of Echoes of the Unknown. If you found this story compelling, please don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share with fellow mystery lovers. Until next time, stay safe, stay curious, and remember, some mysteries will fight harder than others to remain unsolved.